Early morning. A muddy tree line east of Pokrovsk, in Donetsk Oblast. A Russian mechanized column, 21 vehicles, 2 T-90Ms leading, BMPs and BTRs stacked behind them, rolls into a shallow clearing between two bands of broken forest. The column slows. The lead vehicles push forward a few dozen meters, then stop. The column begins to bunch. Engines idle. Commanders step down from hatches to confer. Above them, at 400 meters altitude, a Ukrainian Mavic 3T thermal drone has been watching this exact clearing for 9 days. The drone operator's screen shows 21 heat signatures compressed into a 200-meter arc. The column has done this before, twice in fact. Same clearing, same stop, same window between pushes toward the Ukrainian line. Ukraine's general staff has a word for this pattern. They call it a gift. A $500 drone is about to help erase assets worth tens of millions of dollars. Open-source trackers say this happens dozens of times a week across the front. This is how one of those moments unfolds. Russia's mechanized units have been pressing the Pokrovsk axis hard. Ukrainian defensive positions have bent, but not broken. The Russians developed a rhythm. Push, absorb casualties, pull back to this clearing, regroup, push again. It is a grinding, expensive rhythm. What they did not account for is that rhythms can be mapped. This one has been mapped, in precise detail, for over a week. The recon drone has logged every visit. It counted vehicles, cataloged positions, measured the gap between when the column enters the clearing and when it dresses its formation for the next assault. That gap, averaging 11 minutes across 3 prior visits, is the window. Not a window Ukraine stumbled on, a window Ukraine built this response around. Here is the cost asymmetry that defines this war. A single T-90M, Russia's most modern frontline tank, costs roughly $3 million by Western analyst estimates. A single FPV drone, the weapon Ukraine's ground teams have industrialized across the front, costs somewhere between $300 and $600 depending on components. The warhead is typically a modified RPG round or a small-shaped charge. Against the top armor of a stationary tank, it is enough. Oryx, the open-source tracker that documents equipment losses through confirmed visual evidence, has tallied well over 1,000 Russian tanks destroyed or captured since the full-scale invasion began. The FPV drone did not cause all of those losses. But in recent months, OSINT-confirmed footage suggests it has become the dominant mechanism on the Pokrovsk axis specifically. The clearing sits roughly 8 kilometers behind the Russian forward line of troops. 8 kilometers was once considered safe drone distance, beyond the range of first-generation commercial FPVs Ukraine deployed early in the war. That calculation is now obsolete. Extended-range FPV frames, some using fiber-optic tethers to defeat electronic warfare jamming, have pushed effective engagement distances to 12, 15, sometimes 20 kilometers. The Russian column commanders using this clearing may not have updated their threat model. That failure, small and administrative in nature, is about to become catastrophic. 4 Ukrainian FPV teams are in position. They staged before dawn. 2 teams west of the clearing, 2 east, positioned to bracket the middle of the column from opposing angles. The geometry is deliberate. Strike the center first, create burning hulks that block forward and rearward escape routes simultaneously, and force surviving vehicles to push laterally into the tree line, where the ground is soft and mobility collapses. The drone coordinator watching the overhead feed gives the call. The column has been stationary for 4 minutes. Commanders are still outside their vehicles. The formation is as compressed as it will get. The first FPV launches from the western position. It does not reach the target. Somewhere in the first 300 meters of flight, the signal degrades. The drone pitches, loses orientation, and augers into the field 30 meters short of the column's left flank. Russian electronic warfare, A Krasuka class or similar ground-based jamming system operating from somewhere behind the tree line is active. The window may be shorter than 9 days of observation suggested. The second FPV launches immediately. A different frequency band, a different operator, a flight path that hugs the tree line rather than crossing open ground directly. The Russian jamming geometry has a gap along the northern tree line edge. The Ukrainian team identified it during reconnaissance by flying test runs at low altitude and noting where signal held. The second drone uses that gap. It closes at approximately 130 kilometers per hour. The operator's feed shows the column in detail. The distinctive welded-on cage armor on the lead T-90M, the ERA tiles on its turret flanks, the open hatches of a BMP-2 vehicles behind it, with figures standing beside the hull. The drone locks onto the second vehicle, a T-90M without the full cage package. Exposed top armor visible. The angle of approach is steep, 60 degrees from vertical. Against top armor, the shaped charge performs differently than a side impact. ERA tiles are positioned for frontal and lateral threats. The top deck of a T-90M carries between 40 and 80 millimeters of protection, depending on the variant. An RPG-7 warhead modified for FPV delivery generates a penetration figure analysts estimate at roughly 300 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor equivalent. The math resolves in the operator's feed as the screen goes white. Secondary detonation follows within 4 seconds. The tank's ammunition cooks off. Russian tank doctrine does not use blowout panels in the same configuration as Western equivalents. The turret does not separate in this instance, but OSINT confirmed drone footage of similar engagements on this axis has shown that outcome repeatedly. What the overhead thermal feed shows is a vehicle that transitions from cold engine idle to a high heat bloom in under 10 seconds, then a pressure wave that rocks the BMP immediately behind it. The column breaks, not in an organized tactical withdrawal, in panic. What happens next rewrites the column's fate entirely, and it matters because of a decision made 9 days earlier about which vehicle to spare. Vehicle 17, a BTR-82A near the rear of the column, had been flagged during reconnaissance. The overhead drone operator had watched it on 3 separate visits and noted that it always parked at the extreme rear of the formation, engine running, angled for fast egress. Ukrainian assessment, command vehicle, or at minimum, carrying personnel with authority to order retreat. The decision was to leave it alone in the initial strike sequence, not out of mercy, out of intelligence logic. A fleeing command vehicle with a working radio is more useful than a destroyed one. It will transmit interceptable communications that feed the targeting chain for follow-on strikes. 3 of the 4 FPV teams are now executing. The east side teams target the middle of the column, a pair of BMPs and a second T-90M that has attempted to reverse and is now angled diagonally across the track, blocking rearward movement for 6 vehicles behind it. The FPV from the eastern position catches the T-90M on its exposed left flank as it traverses. This is not a top attack. This is a side shot against ERA-equipped armor. The ERA tile detonates on impact. The ERA does its job. The drone's warhead is defeated. The second Eastern FPV has already launched on a time delay from the first. The crew of the T-90M, conditioned by training to button up after an ERA activation, has closed the hatch. They do not see the second drone. It finds the gap between the ERA tile that just fired. ERA tiles do not reload, and the next tile in the array. The penetration is not clean, but thermal imaging on follow-up reconnaissance shows the vehicle immobile, with a sustained heat signature for the next 40 minutes. 2 confirmed kills within the first 90 seconds of engagement. The column is fractured in the middle. Burning vehicles create choke points forward and rearward. Lateral movement into the tree line is exactly what the Ukrainian positioning anticipated. Here is the part most analyses miss. The terrain flanking this clearing is not simply soft ground. Ukrainian engineers, working from 9 days of overhead reconnaissance data, had mapped the tree line's subsurface using ground-penetrating radar mounted on a small commercial drone, and identified a band of waterlogged soil running along the northern edge. A vehicle pushing into that zone at speed would lose traction within 30 to 50 meters. The western tree line was firmer but narrower, terminating in an anti-tank ditch from earlier defensive works. The clearing was, effectively, a box. The Russian column commanders, pressing the same rally point through 3 assaults, had never identified it as one. What stands out about this case is that the intelligence failure is not exotic. No sophisticated SIGINT breakthrough, no spy inside Russian headquarters. 9 days of a Mavic drone watching a clearing that Russian forces assumed was safe, and a planning team that asked a simple question. If they stop here again, how do we make sure they cannot leave? Put yourself in the position of the Russian column commander in that clearing. You have used this rally point twice before without incident. Your electronic warfare assets are active. You are 8 kilometers behind the forward line. Nothing in your recent operational picture has flagged this location as compromised. The threat assessment says, low risk. This is not incompetence in isolation. It is a systemic failure. The same clearing, the same risk calculus, 3 times in sequence. The institutional pressure to maintain tempo on the Pokrovsk axis, driven from operational headquarters, has created exactly these conditions. Commanders who raise concerns about rally point security slow the operational rhythm. Slowing the rhythm draws attention, so the clearing gets used again. The overhead drone feed now shows 4 vehicles attempting to push north into the tree line. The first 2 make it perhaps 40 meters before the soil gives way. They are not destroyed. They are immobilized, tracks spinning, engines redlining. Immobilized vehicles on the modern battlefield have a short life expectancy. The drone teams know this. A 5th FPV is queued. The 3rd engagement trigger is this. At this moment, with 2 T-90Ms confirmed destroyed, 2 additional vehicles immobilized in the tree line, and the column fractured into non-cohesive elements, what is the correct Ukrainian action? Commit the remaining FPV assets immediately? Or hold? Let the Russian EW operators burn through their jamming cycles trying to engage the overhead drone, then strike. The answer, consistent with what OSINT analysts have documented across multiple engagements on this axis, is to hold. Briefly, Russian EW systems are not unlimited resources. Their jamming cycles against FPV frequencies are managed, and prolonged active jamming consumes both power and operator attention. The Ukrainian FPV teams wait approximately 90 seconds. Then the 5th and 6th drones launch simultaneously from opposite vectors. The 5th targets the lead T-90M, the one with the full cage armor package, the one the first FPV team had initially deprioritized. Cage armor, metal bar grids spaced to pre-detonate shaped charges before they reach the hull, is effective against standard FPV warheads. Ukraine's response to this, documented in OSINT-confirmed footage from recent months, is a 2-phase attack. A smaller drone detonates against the cage, collapsing one section, and a second follows within seconds through the gap. This engagement uses that technique. The 5th FPV hits the cage on the turret's right forward quadrant. The cage section folds. The 6th FPV, 3 seconds behind, finds the gap. The lead T-90M is a confirmed kill. 3 T-90Ms carry a combined acquisition value that exceeds the annual GDP of a small municipality. The weapons that destroyed them cost, in aggregate, perhaps $3,000. Ukraine's general staff reports engagements of this type as part of a systematic effort to attrite Russian armored reserves faster than Russian industry can replace them. Western analysts have noted that Russian tank production, running at estimated rates of a few hundred units per year, including refurbished Soviet-era stocks, is a finite resource under sustained attrition. Oryx's confirmed count of Russian armored vehicle losses, tanks, IFVs, APCs, now runs into thousands of entries, each verified by visual documentation. The number of unconfirmed losses is, by methodology, higher. Subscribe to Hard Contact. We break down a new frontline engagement every week, sourced from OSINT-confirmed footage and Ukrainian General Staff reporting. The BTR-82A at the rear of the column, Vehicle 17, the one Ukraine deliberately spared, is now moving. It exits the clearing at speed, heading northeast on a track the overhead drone continues to follow. Its radio is active. The intercept does not capture content in real time, but the frequency and transmission pattern are logged. This data feeds into the targeting chain for follow-on operations. The Vehicle 17 decision, made during the 9-day reconnaissance phase, is paying the dividend it was designed to pay. The clearing engagement, from first FPV launch to the last confirmed strike, spans approximately 8 minutes. What remains? 3 T-90Ms destroyed, 2 additional armored vehicles immobilized in the tree line, at least 2 BMPs damaged by secondary detonations from the tank ammunition cook-offs. Ukraine's General Staff, in its subsequent reporting on this axis, attributes losses in this category to ongoing FPV ambush operations without specifying individual engagements. The attribution is appropriately hedged. Battle damage assessment at this level of precision requires follow-up reconnaissance that takes time. OSINT-confirmed footage, cross-referenced with the overhead drone feed, provides the most reliable picture available. The Russian forces that survived the clearing are not finished. What the engagement accomplished is not the destruction of the push. It destroyed the push's armored core. The mechanized element scheduled to lead the next assault on Ukrainian positions is no longer capable of doing so. What replaces it, if anything, and on what timeline, is a question Ukrainian intelligence is already working. The overhead drone, the one that watched this clearing for 9 days, is now redirected. A different rally point, flagged by pattern analysis as a candidate for the next regrouping stop, is now under observation. Here is what this case tells us about the tactical situation on the Pokrovsk axis right now. The FPV drone did not win this engagement. The engagement was won during 9 days of patient overhead surveillance, during the decision to stage teams at specific angles, during the terrain analysis that identified the waterlogged northern flank, during the choice to spare Vehicle 17. The FPV is the terminal instrument. The intelligence architecture around it is the weapon. If you track this war closely, you already see this pattern across multiple axes. The cost exchange math, hundreds of dollars against millions of dollars, is the headline. The institutional intelligence work that makes that math possible is the story underneath it. Russia's armored doctrine, built for mass and momentum, has not adapted to an environment where every rally point is a potential kill zone and every reuse of a supposedly safe location is a data point in an adversary's targeting file. One vehicle peeled off this column and survived, Vehicle 17. That choice was not random. It was a deliberate intelligence call, made days before the engagement, embedded in the planning. The vehicle Ukraine spared transmitted data Ukraine needed more than another confirmed kill. The lesson: the objective of an ambush is not always maximum destruction at the point of contact. Sometimes the most valuable outcome is what survives, and what it tells you next. The open loop planted early in this account closes here. Vehicle 17's egress trajectory, logged by the overhead drone, identified a secondary rally point 3 kilometers northeast of the clearing, a location that had not previously appeared in Ukrainian targeting data. Within hours of the clearing engagement, that location was under observation by a second reconnaissance drone. The cycle repeats. The pattern compounds. There is a larger question this engagement raises about the structure of the war right now. Russian mechanized forces on the Pokrovsk axis are pressing with assets being consumed faster than the tactical gains they purchase. The clearing engagement is one data point. Multiply it across a front spanning hundreds of kilometers, across weeks and months of operations, and the arithmetic of attrition becomes the primary strategic fact. The question, a genuine one, without a clean answer, is whether Russian Operational Command has recalibrated its tempo expectations to account for this rate of loss, or whether institutional pressure to show progress on the Pokrovsk axis is overriding the mathematics. Comment below. Do you think Russian operational commanders on this axis have updated their threat model for the current FPV environment? Or is the pattern of reusing the same rally points still ongoing? We read every response. What does this engagement tell us about where armored warfare is heading? The tank is not obsolete, but a tank operating without persistent overhead ISR coverage, without EW assets sufficient to defeat modern extended-range FPV systems, and without any protocol for rally point security, is a $3 million target in an environment designed to find and erase it. The clearing near Pokrovsk is not an anomaly. OSINT-confirmed footage and Ukrainian General Staff reporting suggest it is standard operating procedure, quietly systematized, running on multiple axes simultaneously. The Russian column entered that clearing because it had been there before and survived. The third time was the last time. 9 days of a thermal drone watching empty ground. 4 FPV teams at pre-positioned angles. 1 vehicle deliberately spared for the intelligence value of its retreat. The math, roughly $3,000 in weapons against assets worth tens of millions. The outcome, a Russian armored push on the Pokrovsk axis, degraded for days, possibly longer, while Ukrainian forces continue applying the same methodology to the next clearing, the next column, the next pattern that repeats one time too many. The war continues. The drone is already watching somewhere new. 3 questions worth sitting with. First, at what point does the cost-exchange ratio on this axis force a Russian doctrinal shift away from mechanized armored pushes toward a different operational approach? And what does that shift look like? Second, the EW gap along the northern tree line that Ukraine exploited existed because Russian jamming geometry has coverage holes that persistent reconnaissance can map. How long before Russian forces rotate their EW positioning frequently enough to close those gaps? Third, if Vehicle 17's transmission data led to a secondary rally point being identified and placed under observation within hours, what does that suggest about the intelligence cycle speed Ukrainian forces are operating at right now? And how does that speed compare to what Russian operational headquarters can respond with? If those questions interest you, and if you want the next engagement broken down with the same level of sourced, OSINT-grounded analysis, subscribe to Hard Contact. Every week, a new frontline case. Every week, the tactical and doctrinal layer that the headline numbers don't show.